Hi, I'm Jim Boy, and you undoubtedly know by now if you've been watching our videos that I'm one of two authors of From Peril to Light,
And I'm Alan Bory, the other author.
and we're identical twins. You know that as well, I'm sure. This is our fifth video, and we hope you've enjoyed the previous four. If you haven't, go back and watch them. I think you'll like them. This is our fifth series about From Peril to Light, the book, this novel that Alan and I wrote. Today, we're going to talk about the transition from writing fiction, excuse me, nonfiction to writing fiction. Both Alan and I have written two previous books, nonfiction books. We've written scores of articles and columns as well, professional. And this was our first attempt at writing a book of fiction. We did this so that we could really promote this message of understanding and acceptance, but get it out to a wide audience of people that would be readers of fiction books and have that message embedded in the book. Writing a novel is certainly very different from writing a nonfiction work as well. Most of us probably remember high school English. I'm not sure I remember. It's a long way past, but there's certain things you need to have in a storyline. You need to have a plot. And we wanted a very stimulating plot that would really be attractive to readers. You need that. And that storyline we wanted to have to be continually engaging people throughout the novel. You also need characters. We developed a set of what we think are interesting and realistic characters with compelling stories. And finally, the first of these items is a setting. And we wanted a setting that would really be appropriate for our story. After we talk about these first three aspects, we're going to get into some additional items as well. I had initially developed a storyline and list of characters when Alan joined me for this, and we expanded on the storyline, we expanded on the characters as well. Alan's going to talk about how we use these characters in plot and in the setting to achieve our objective with this book.
So what we really, writing the plot, we needed to have a plot that had continuous action so the reader would be drawn in. We wanted the reader, we wanted to attract readers, and we also wanted to keep the readers reading the book. So we wanted constant action. We also wanted suspense. So we wanted the suspense to go until the end of the book. I think that's what people kind of sometimes expect. And then,
and we want them to finish it too.
Yes. And another important aspect, of course, was the dialogue. So we think we did create a suspenseful novel. We also wanted suspense for another reason. We wanted the characters to have some tense circumstances. And if they had tense circumstances, then they would, it would help with the dialogue. And we wanted to make sure that we gave the characters some reasons to talk to each other. We needed to have not only action, but we also needed to have periods where there was time for them to talk, but action wasn't going on. So those were important things that we needed to consider when we talked about the plot line. We also needed to have characters who spent a substantial amount of time together. So they couldn't just leave. And so they were where we needed them to be staying basically against their will at times. We wanted to have their conversations have some depth to them. And so it's helpful when people are more emotional to be and have reasons and have the time to talk. But we also didn't want that conversation, which is super important to get out our point, to overwhelm the action in the novel. So those are a lot of the considerations we had when we were trying to develop the plot. Now, the characters are also were critically important as well. And so the characters that Jim designed were all from different backgrounds. They had different perspectives. They had diversity in race, in ethnicity, religious beliefs, socioeconomic status, countries of origin, and gender perspectives. So we wanted to make sure that we covered as many areas as we could so that we could show how lots of people had different viewpoints. And we also wanted to make sure that every reader might be interested because their perspective might be shown in the book. Uh, the but we wanted to do this all within the tension of an exciting novel. The setting of Raleigh was something that we chose for several reasons. One, we were familiar with it. Jim and I went to high school in Raleigh. Jim went to college in Raleigh, and I went to college nearby Chapel Hill. After we did at some point move away, but Jim moved back fairly recently before he moved to Seattle and lived there for a period of time. So he became reacquainted with it. Raleigh is an area that was, because of the high tech industry, is drawing a lot of people from a lot of different areas. And so we knew that we could legitimately have characters from a lot of areas in the country and also internationally that would be present in Raleigh. And so it was realistic for them to be there. We also wanted a city that was not just one of the usual cities. It wasn't New York or Chicago or LA, but it was a city that people may not be used to reading about. That might add some interest. It also was a city that wasn't that was big enough to have the different people that we wanted, and an area that was diverse enough. Now, those considerations we've talked about so far, the plot and the characters and setting of what people hear about quite often. But there's some more sophisticated considerations, such as point of view, tense, dialogue, and research that I'm going to leave to Jim because those are more difficult to explain.
Thanks a lot, Alan. So looking at tense, we really wanted to have the reader engaged in the novel. We wanted to have a feeling of action. So we use present tense to bring the reader in and have it feel like it's happening to them at that time. That was really very important. Writing in present tense doesn't come natural to nonfiction writers as well. I can't tell you the number of times we corrected to present tense what we had written in past tense. But I think if you read it, it's all in present tense now. A little bit more complicated is the notion of point of view. Technically, it could be first person, second person, or third person, but let's keep this pretty simple. Basically, it's from what perspective are you telling the story? Are you telling the story from someone who's all-knowing, who's looking down on the action? Are you looking at it only from one individual actor's perspective, one character's perspective? How are you looking at that? Another challenge is shifting from one person's perspective to another can sometimes get a little bit confusing for a reader. So we did choose to write in multiple perspectives, but we did that through changing from scene to scene. So within a scene, within a section of the book, a section of the chapter, we only have one person that we're referencing from. So we're in that person's head and with what they're thinking and what they're going through, but that shifts from time to time to another setting where we're in somebody else's head, if you will, in that process. Dialogue is particularly a challenge for nonfiction writers as well. We want it to be very realistic. However, we really want it to be consistent with the backgrounds of our characters. We have a very diverse set of characters, as you know, from different countries, from very different backgrounds, socioeconomically and otherwise. So we wanted to write and have the dialogue as they would say it. At the same time, we didn't want to be condescending. We didn't want to stereotype those individuals or appear that we were degrading them in somehow because they spoke in less educated English or they had slang. So we really wanted to have that appropriate balance of being respectful, yet trying to speak as they would say things. We think we've achieved that. We have done slang in a number of parts, and especially with some of the other characters that are necessarily not part of the major characters of the story. You all know that when you write a nonfiction book, you got to do a lot of research, and people may not necessarily realize how much research goes on for a book of fiction. We researched a lot of technical aspects of our story, of the plot, the blackout, how it happened, how it took place. And we looked at a whole number of other issues within the story as well. And to create the characters, we looked at backgrounds of people from different countries and did a lot of research on that. And I think people actually, when they read the book, they not only get the message, but they learn a lot about the cultures. For instance, we have someone who is from Syria, and the Syrian situation is very, very complex. And we think we really help provide some information about what was going on in Syria. We did research such that we looked at what time of day in that time of year will the sun go down. And so we get the sunrise and sunsets right within Raleigh, North Carolina, where it took place. We look at the blackout, for instance. Alan talked to a friend of his. It's a career electrician for 50 years and about how electricity works, so that we really had that as realistic as possible. So Al, what would you say some of the other challenging aspects of the book are?
Well, I'd say the most challenging was to get the dialogue right among the characters. Now, we want to show that if you listen to each other and interact in the right way, that you can really learn and you can profit by that. But it takes place in a fairly compact period of time. We're talking about a weekend that most of at least the first part, the action takes place. So we want to make sure that we didn't have the characters just agreeing with each other quickly, but yet on the other hand, we need to show how they might do that and how they could see each other's viewpoint. One of the things that we used, I think, very effectively was we used joint action. So when people do things and they're faced with dangers, joint dangers, where they have to act together, that's a bonding experience, which really helps and which really accelerates any feelings they might have for each other and any empathy they might have for each other. So we think that was very helpful. But
we also did a lot. We also did a lot of rewrites. we had some early reviews by some friends and others, and they gave us some very, very positive feedback. So we really changed the course, the time of the narrative, if you will, and the pace of that to really reflect what is more accurate. Sorry to interject there, Alan.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I think that was the most difficult part of the thing we had to tweak the most to get right. And we think we did that, and hopefully we did. And hopefully you can see that how people can change by listening to each other. And that's, of course, so that's what we wanted to explain today about how we wrote fiction as opposed to nonfiction. And next week, in our next video, we want to talk about what we hope that will happen as a result of this book, and will it change people and how. And so we'll do that next week. And thank you so much for joining us now.